Hi, this is Joe Bolen, and welcome to learning about VisualBasic.net. In this video and the next one coming up, we're going to look at creating a non-database type of program where instead of going out to like Microsoft Access or Microsoft SQL database, we're going to create our own file to preserve the information that we're working with. Many times we're not needing to have the full-fledged power of a database, and it is also an extra layer of complexity that a database introduces into our program. So when we don't need to have the full power of a relational database, this kind of solution that I'm going to be presenting to you is one possibility that is easy to implement and to code. So let's learn about how to create a non-database kind of program. So let's first of all go to Visual Studio, and we're going to learn about our program. I'm going to run the program first so you get an idea what it's like. And here's our program. I'm using a DataGridView to present the data. And you see it already has some data in there that I call my contacts. And we have even a combo box out here for gender. And the date, well, I don't have any values in here right now, is in a date format to present that as well. So this is a very simple data grid presentation. And we'll make this in this video, the actual data grid. We'll learn how to work with classes in this video, how to work with collections. In this case, we're going to be working with the BindingList collection. And then we're going to be working with the DataGridView and how to configure it properly. Learn about data binding, getting our data so it interfaces with the form and the controls on our form. Learn how to validate our data in our DataGridView that we're working with. And then lastly, in our second video, we're going to look at preserving the data that we have, so that as we exit our program, we preserve that information to a file. And we're going to look at two different types of files. We're going to look at a binary file, as well as we're going to look at an XML file. Both have their advantages, and we'll talk about that in our second video. But we're going to right now start by learning about our documentation for this program by going in and taking a look at that. So I'm going to bring up our documentation area of my program that I've already created. And you'll see that we're going to have our image of what I just presented to you at Imgur. You can take a look at that image if you'd like to design it, but it's pretty simple DataGridView, and we'll learn how to do that in this video. And then all the code that I'll be working with is at Pastebin, at this location at Pastebin. So that you can go out there, actually download the code, code in your screen, and you're ready to go. Or just go out there and study it to educate yourself further after you have finished the video. So if you'd like to pause the video at this point in time and record down these URL links, do so, and then start back up, and we'll continue on with our presentation. And of course, all the videos I create right now are at YouTube at Bolen Presents. So go out there and take a look at other videos to learn about what I'm doing. And also remember, this is going to be a two-part video. We're going to deal with basically the data grid in this particular one. So let's come back and let's begin the process of working with this. I'm in Visual Studio, and I'm going to do a new project. And I'm going to make certain I pick the classic desktop for Windows Basic. I'm going to use the Windows form, and I'm currently at the .NET Framework 4.6.1, but if you're at an older version of Visual Studio, that's okay. This will work fine for that level as well. I'm going to name this one Non-Database Demo and hit the OK button. And that'll create our database, our project, our solution, our project, and our form out there. one of the first things I do is rename the form. In this case, I'm going to rename the form by right-clicking, hitting the rename button, and rename this main form. Okay. Once that's done, I also go to the project itself, double-click on the project, and make certain my startup form is now main form. On that, I'm going to hit Save All at this point, and I'm going to save it to a location in my projects folder, and I'm going to use the same solution name as the name of my project. Okay, I can close out this part now, and we'll go back to our form and work with it in just a minute. But before I do that, we need to have some kind of structure for our data that we're going to be saving. And normally we set up a schema in a database just defining all the fields and properties. Well, we're going to do a little bit like that, but we're going to create a class in our project, and that class will define our different properties that we need for our ultimate file that we're going to have. So I'm going to go to the project, right-click on it, and click on Add, and I'm going to say Add New Class. And I'll bring up my ability here on the class, and what I'm going to be adding is a class called Contact. And I'll add the VB at the end and create our contact class. Now in the class, normally what we do is we add properties to that class, and we do a public prop, and then I hit tab, and that creates a template for me to enter in the property. This would be the property that I'm referencing. This would be the backer field that holds the values, and this would be the getter and setter of that property, so that I can access those properties in other parts of my program by just referencing the property name that I put in here. Now, we're not going to use the full getter setter. We're going to use what's called an auto implemented version. So I'm going to cut this out and restart the process. This time we're going to use what's called auto implement. So I'm going to say public property, and then I'm going to put in contact ID as integer. And that will define that property and take care of both the getter and setter of this one, since we're not trying to do any kind of validation with this. Now, one thing you could do here, we're not going to do it in this program, but this application would be very well suited for it, is instead of using an integer for the contact ID, we could use the GUID, which is a unique identifier, and that would provide us with a key. The way we're going to be doing this, though, is this will become our key in a sense, but it's going to be a key that we're going to have to maintain ourselves. So we'll do that in our program, but this will be basically the record key that we're going to be working with. Now we're going to put in some other fields to define our particular one, and I'm just going to quickly copy and paste some in here, and you'll see what I'm going to end up with. There we go. We've got number ones. I'm going to make the screen a little smaller for you, but you'll see all the different ones here. So I have first name, middle name, last name, 2 lines for street address, city, state, postal or zip code, country code, primary telephone, secondary telephone, date of birth, gender notes. We can put in anything we'd like here, but this is just a simple sample of what we want in our file that we're going to be working with. Now we also need to add what's called a constructor. Now there is a default constructor in the background, but we're going to be more specific on this so you get a better understanding of classes. So I'm going to come down here and add a constructor, and for that it's public sub new. Then hit the enter key, and it'll create the constructor. And what we're going to do is do my base new. And that's all we need for the default constructor. Now I'm going to add a parameterized constructor as well on that, so you understand that can be done. And it's also public sub new, but I'm going to show you a little difference here. We're going to enter in some parameters that will be passed to it. So I'm going to do by val, and I'm going to do ID as integer, then by val first name as string, and by val last name as string. And what we're going to do after we pass those in is we're going to also do my base new, and then we're going to take contact ID, which is our property, and I'm going to assign it the value that came in being passed in. So I'm going to assign it ID. And I'm also going to take first name from my property that I have up above and assign it the parameter that I pass in, and also do that for last name. And there we go. I'll clean that up a little bit. So we've got our default constructor with public sub new. Since it may be inherited from other classes, we use the MyBase new behind it. And this initializes this class with all the properties in it. And then if we pass in a parameterized constructor of new on this, we can pass in the ID, first name and last name, and quickly fill out those properties as we begin creating a new class of contact. So this creates our contact class. I'm going to hit save here. I'm going to go back to my project, and I'm going to right click on it and go to the project and hit build. This will create the actual objects in the background, not just our source code. Okay, now I've got this built, and this is our different fields that will be part of our class. And once again, this is a simple class we've created with auto-implemented properties. Okay, let's go back to our form now, and let's work on our form. So our form we're going to work with, and I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to bring up the properties view, properties window, and I'm going to tag it to the part of my screen here and start working with it. And we see our name as main form. And I'm going to come on down. One of the first things I'm going to set is the font. Microsoft recommends the default font for a Windows form be Seago UI regular font style 9-point. They found out that's a good font for readability for all users. And so I've set that, and that also changed a little bit the size of my form. Then I'm going to come on down as well, and I'm going to change the size of my form to make it more like a monitor size, and I'm going to use 640 by 320. I use that pretty much all the time for a standard, and this will make sizing easy as we expand the form. Also, I'm going to change the start position, in this case to center screen for this one. And I'm going to change the text property to call this contact maintenance. Okay, and that changed my caption title area of my form. And at this point, it's a good idea to save frequently, and so I'll save the form as we've got it. So we now got the form. We've got our contact class ready to go. And so now let's put in our data grid. Well, we can do that very simply. Instead of actually going to the tools and picking the data grid, I already have this class defined. And what I want to do is data bind this class structure to my form, in this case, the data grid. So I'm going to open up data sources. And if you don't have this showing on your left side, you can come up to view and drop down and pick data source. We're going to bring that up. I'm going to pin this and click on add new data source. And as I do, we're not going to go to a database in this case. We're going to go to an object. In this case, it's going to be the contact object we created. I'm going to hit next. Now, if you do not see the contact object as you drill down, you need to build that. You saw me build that, and you'll see that I have the contact showing up as an object that I want to work with. So I've checked off contact, and I hit finish. And now you see that I have all those different properties that I had defined in my contact class available to me. Also, we can bring it in as a detailed view, or we can bring it in as data grid view. And I'd recommend you try both, but we're going to do for this demo just the data grid view. Okay, so I've got the data grid view set, and all I'm going to do is take this and drag it on over to my form and release it. And then I'm going to auto close this one out. Okay. We've got a little rebuild required, so I'm going to do that. And that took care of my little error that I had. And you'll see that I had the auto generate automatically turning in, and there are my captions from my class that I have created. So I'm going to click on the smart GIF here, and we're going to dock into the parent container. And I'm also going to enable column reordering. And we're going to do a little editing of the columns real quickly on that. So we start out when we have our contact ID. Now the contact ID right now is read-only false. We want to make that so the user cannot change this. We're going to do that programmatically as we run the program, but I will make it visible, so we'll leave that visible. Let's go to first name, and I'm going to change first name's heading so it's a little bit user friendly and put a space in between that. There. And then I'm going to do the same thing for middle name, last name, street address, and then if they have a very long address with extra information, we have extended address. City and state are fine. Postal code, we want to put the space in there as well. And then I'm going to scroll on down here a little bit to country code, put a little dash in there. I'm doing only the header text, not the property. Okay, now we're coming to primary and secondary telephone. Date of birth, I'm going to change this to DOB to make it a little easier to read. Date of birth for our header text. And I am going to change the default cell style for this one. And what I'm going to do is change the format of this one to the short date, which is the D format right there. So I've changed that to D. We could prompt on this, and you'll see that I have different options that will come across. But I'm going to go with the short date on that, and it's the D. And I'm going to align this one so it's left aligned, or right aligned, I should say. And we're going to go right center on that. So I'm going to middle right. There we go. So it's over to the side, and say, okay, now depending upon your country, you may want this a little bit differently, but this will give me the short date for US in this case. Now gender, I'm going to change this one a little bit. The text is fine. I'm going to scroll down here to where it says column type, and there's a drop down on column type. I'm going to change that, in this case, to a combo box. So I'm going to check the combo box there, and then you'll see I have an items collection up above, and I'm going to change that, and you'll see now I have a collection editor. The first one I'll leave blank. Second one I'll make M for male, and The third one, F for female. Okay, so we've got those in our collection on that. And let me check to see if I have anything else I want to change on that. Take a look at style here. Display style drop down button. We're going to make that a combo box instead. And then the last one is notes, and I'm going to actually remove notes on this one. I'm not going to try to display notes in my data grid. This would be where I do it in the detailed version. That's I'm going to remove that one out. And now I'm going to say okay to all of the things I've changed. I've got things set here, and I'm fine there. And so I've got the way that I present the data changed now. Now let's finish out modifying our data grid. And I'm going to highlight the data grid and have it over here in the properties area. And I'm going to come down through here and do a couple of changes. One of the things I want to do is the alternating row default cell size. Click on that, hit the ellipsis, and you'll see that the cell style builder comes up. I'm going to click on the background color, and we're going to go to web, and I'm going to change this to white smoke. It's a very light type of gray, and this makes it good for people to see the different lines. Sometimes you want to get colors in here, but remember there are people with visual disabilities that maybe color blindness is part of it. And you may not want to introduce colors. Microsoft does not recommend putting in too many colors because of the issues with those who have forms of color blindness. So white smoke is a nice grayscale version to put in for your alternating color for the different ones in the data grid. Also, we've docked this so we don't have to worry about the anchor property. And the auto size column mode, we changed that to the display cells. And you notice how it adjusted real quickly. And then I'm going to come on down here. I'm going to change the border style to 3D, fixed 3D. Let me slide on down here and take a look at anything else I might want to change. I think we're pretty well set there. So I've got that set. Now let's do a quick save all. Now we're going to have some events that we want to have for this particular program. We're going to have the form load. We're going to do something called housekeeping and initialization in our load area. Then we're going to have it so that when the person exits out of the program, we do what's called form closing. We want to do something in that event area. Also, as we edit our data grid, we'll do some editing checks and validation there. So let's create those events real quickly. I can just take the form itself, highlight the form, make certain the properties say main form. I can double click on the form and it'll create my form load event. So let's do that. You'll see the form load event created. I'm going to go back to the designer. I also am going to have the form closing event. And for the form closing event, I'm going to hit the little lightning event button, change that in my properties, and I'm going to go to the form closing event, which is up here above, form closing. Go ahead, double click on that, and it'll create my form closing event. And then we're going to go back to our form. And I've got the navigation bar that came in when I dragged the data grid across. And I want to add in here the save item area. I want to turn on this one. So I'm right clicking and enabling the button. And also I'm going to hit the button to create an event for the save item. Double clicking it, and that created that one. Let's go back to the designer. At this point now, I'm going to go to the data grid view and create a couple of events for the data grid view. Once again, the lightning bolt's showing. And what I'm going to have is the cell validation event. So I'm going to go to cell, scroll up a little, validating. on that. I'm going to double click on that one, create that event, come back to my form, click on my data grid once again, and I'm going to also have my cell in edit event. Cell, begin edit, let's see, end edit. Where is my cell end edit? There it is, cell end edit. Okay, we'll talk about those events as we get into the code. Okay, let's get into that code. Now I'm going to come up and I'm going to clean up things just a little bit. I'm going to put some spaces in here, and I'm going to put a continuation line there and tab on that. Continuation line. This makes it just a little bit easier to read, and also as we work with it and print it out, it'll be easier to see when we print it out. Okay, so I've got my load event, my form closing event, my navigator save item click event, my cell validating event, and my cell in edit event. And that basically gets us started with that. And one of the things I want to do that when I'm working with the DataGridView is one of the properties does not set well in the designer part of it. You have to actually do that in the code. We're going to do that in the load event. So I'm going to call this make bold column headers. There we go. And we're going to do that by going to referencing the data grid, which is contact DataGridView, and we're going to look at the particular one we're dealing with. In this case, the property is our column default cell style on that, and we're looking at the font. Okay, we're going to adjust that, and we're going to set that equal to new font, and we're going to set it to, in a minute, I'm going to do font style bold first, and then I'm going to come back over here and highlight my starting point, bring it across here, and that'll set the font. Now I'm going to continuate this on down to the next line, and this makes the column header bold. So let's see that real quickly. I'm going to hit start run, and there is my data grid view up, and you'll see the columns are bold on that, and we have our combo box for gender over here, and we'll have our drop down for male female on that, so we can work with that. Okay, we've got that done. Now we're ready to actually do the parts that make this one workable for our program. What we're going to introduce is a couple of things into our program, and one of the things I'm going to do is scroll up here. I think what I'm going to do is just declare it directly here, and then we'll add that correction to it. What I'm going to define is a private property. In this case, we're going to call it contacts, plural, as new. So we're going to instantiate it as a binding list of contact. And we're going to see a little error here because we need to reference that. I'm going to hit my show potential fixes, and it says do a import. So we're going to import system component model, and that corrects that because binding list is part of the namespace of the system component model. So we need that, make it easier to reference. Okay, that takes care of that. And that is the main one we need to set up for the imports area. But we also want to set up one other field into our class declaration of variables. So I'm going to hit private, and we're going to use a variable called high water. And it's basically, if you've ever seen a flood or something, there's like a line left after a flood where the water's height went. And we're going to sort of do that for keeping track of the highest contact ID number that we're working with. So I'm going to say private high water as integer. And we'll let it stay at 0 as it gets initialized. And we're going to take care of tracking high water and using that to update our contact ID later on in our program. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is come back to our designer, and I want to show you something that happened when we brought that in. We came in and we grabbed in our data source area our contact class information of all the properties, and we brought that across. And in the process of doing that, it gave us two different components in our component tray. It gave us the contact binding navigator, which is up at the top here, our navigator, which we're going to use to navigate through the different items of our data grid. It'll also give us the add row, delete, and save item areas to perform our functions. And then it also created a contact binding source. Now this binding source then is connected to the data grid. And if we come over to the data grid's properties, I'm going to highlight the data grid real quickly, come back to the properties button, you'll see that I have probably a binding source set here. So I come down here, or let's see here. Maybe it's not at this spot. Maybe it's up at the top here. Data bindings, there it is. There is our binding information that we're going to work with in a minute. But this does the binding between our data and the grid and keeps everything aligned and intact. So we're going to go now to the code behind and work with it. Let me close that out and go back to view code. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take our contacts binding source, or contact binding source, go to the binding source, not the navigator. We're going to go to the data source property, and we're going to assign it our contacts on that. Okay. And this will allow us to preserve whatever we have in our contacts collection, which is a binding list that contains our contact. We're going to have that assigned. So I'm just going to hit contacts there. That'll take care of binding everything. Now, one other thing that I'll talk about in just a minute is our high water. We want to do that there, but I'm going to postpone that for a second. And at this point, let's take a look at when we come down and do a save item on our data grid. What I want to do there is pretty much a standard that we do all the time. One of the first commands we issue on the save item click event is the validate date on that forces validation to occur. And then we have in that area also our contact binding source. We do an end edit, and that flushes whatever we're working with to the file background area to make certain the data is intact. And then after I do that, we're going to have some changes that occurs after we enter edit. And so I want to refresh my data grid. So I'm going to hit contact binding source I'm going to hit the reset bindings. In this case, it has a parameter that we introduced, and it can be true or false. Now, we're going to use false because the true part is for a database where we might have a schema change. There won't be a change in the schema, so I'm going to hit false. Okay, and that takes care of that. Now, that pretty much gets us set with the basic parts that we're going to need in here. Now, at this point, let's run this program. I don't have any validation in yet, so we're going to start the program. And here's our contact running. I'm going to put in Joe. And you notice I can't edit the contact field, but it started out with a default of 0, which is fine. Put my last name in. Let's come on over here. I'm going to make myself a birthday. Oh, let's go with March 26th. I'm going to make myself young. 1993. And you see the formatting of the short D came in. Hit the drop down and I get M on that. And what I would normally do after I've got that entered in is hit the save button. And this would take care of things. Now, one of the things I want to do is make certain my last name has to be in there. This is going to be sort of like a required field. And we also want to make certain that the contact ID gets incremented. So we're going to take care of that next. I'm going to come up first of all, we'll take care of the high water area. And one of the things we want to do after we get our contacts in place is we want to get our initial high water set. So what I'm going to do at this point, after I've got my contacts in place in my DataGrid binding set, data source, I'm going to say for each item in contacts. This is the binding list. So I'm going to go look at each one there. I'm going to say if my high water is less than the item, now you'll see the intelligence kick in, the contact ID. If it's less than the contact ID, then I want to take high water and I want to assign the item contact ID so it increases. Okay, so that takes care of getting my high water. So if I'm coming in from a file, which we'll do in the second video, we'll find out first of all what the high water mark is by going through all the contacts or that are in our collection and finding that and then assigning it to the high water. Now let's come down to where we actually do the save, and we'll take care of that one as well. So when we do the save area, we want to take care of that high water as well. So what we're going to do right after the validating, we want to, before we do end edit, we want to get our high waters assigned to those different ones that have a value of 0. So I'm going to do for each, in this case they're going to be new contacts. So each new contact in contacts where I'm using what's called a lambda expression, and we're going to use function, and in that function I'm just going to put a C, and that C then references the IntelliSense where contact ID in this case is going to be equal to 0. So it has a 0 value. When I have that, then what I want to do is I'm going to take high water and I'm going to bump it up 1. So I'm going to hit a plus plus equal 1. So I'm going to increment it by 1. And then I'm going to assign that new high water mark to the contact. So I'm going to go new contact dot contact ID equals high water. There we go. So as it loops through, it'll get the new high water mark set on that. So let's run this now with the change of the high water. Once again, every time we do it, we'll lose that till I put some data in. So I'll put my name in here again. We'll just quickly do that. I'll hit the save button, and we should see this take on a value of 1, which it did, and that's what we want to see have happen on that. Now let's add the restriction of validating the last name. And so we're going to come down to cell validation area of our program, and we're going to put that information in. So what I want to do is look for the last name. So I'm going to say if contact DataGridView columns is, and we'll have reference from the parameters coming in are E on that. On that, I'm going to go with column index on that, and then I'm going to go to the property of that column. I'm going to go to the data property name on that. Is if it's equal to, in this case, last name, which is the name of our property that we had there, then I'm going to want to work with this. So what I'm going to do here is say, okay, we're working with now the column of last name, and then I'm going to say if, get another if in here, if string is null or white space, and we're working with the E formatted value to string. So we're looking at that particular cell on that. If that particular one is null or white space, then we want to take the contact data grid row, contact data grid view, rows, and then we're going to reference the row index, and we're going to go to the property value of row index of the error text, and we're going to turn on an error. And in that error, we're going to say last name. Oh, I should say we got to sign it, put an equal sign in front of it. Last name is a required value on it. So it's our error text. Now we get an error, we'll have that turned on. Now we want to give the ability to turn off that error and cancel on that row if we have a problem. The other thing I want to do here is, if that's true, I've got an error, I also want to do e-cancel, which will prevent that from processing. E-cancel equals true. Okay. Now, here's our part for allowing us to escape out of that situation with the escape key. And what I'm going to do, enter in here, is the same thing. I'm going to take this particular line right here, to copy it, drop it down here. And this happens when we hit the cancel on the end edit. What we're going to do is turn off that message. So I'm going to go with string empty here. And that turns off the message. Okay, let's see this work. Okay, I've got my program up and running. I'll put in Joe, Bolen. Well, let's try it without Bolen. I'll tab out, and you'll see my I'm stuck in the cell, and my little row error message came on. It says Last name is required value. So I need to put something in here. Once I put something in here and tab out, that goes away, and I can then hit the save on that. So we can go down here another row, and I'll put in, oh, let's say Kathy, and I'll Cunningham, and we'll skip that and save it. Now we'll see our rows updating, 1 and 2, and everything. Now, let me say where we are right now. We've created our data grid view. It's based off the class contact that we put in place. We have bound that kind of information to our data grid view using the collection of the binding list on that. And so everything we do and change here and edit gets updated and changed. Now we've got one problem though. When I end the program, I'll lose all that data and I'll have to start all over again. So in our next video, we're going to take a look at how to actually take care of processing that so we can save the data that we've worked with, save it when we exit the program, then as we start the program again, load that information back in from a file. Now we'll create two different types of files. We'll create what's called a binary file, which is very tight and condensed, very quickly written to the disk and read back from the disk. And then we'll create what's called an XML file, which is a little bit larger file. It's one that we can easily read with and look at, and it's also good for when we have to transport data across through routers and other kinds of filters, remote locations, because that data will pass through with no problem. So there's some times where we want to use an XML file, and other times when we like a binary file. And I'll show you both versions in this demo. In real life, we use either one or the other, depending on our needs. But this will give you an idea how easy it is to create a file out there that saves all the data that we're working with. So get your hands dirty in the code. Go back out the paste bin that we saw at the beginning of the program and take a look at the code. The full code's there, including our saving to a file. But take a look at that code. Get your hands dirty with it. Watch this video over again to see how I did things. It'll also give you a good memory practice work on how to work with a data grid view. Because you work with the data grid view a lot and you have to set a number of those configurations every time you work with it. And this will get you going with that as well. So take care, get your hands dirty, and come back and watch the next video where we finish up saving our data.